Hello, BookTube. I went to the Brattle Bookshop first thing this morning. That, for those of you who are new, is a used bookstore in the heart of downtown Boston. They are fantastic, just an incredible place. Huge turnover, gigantic amount of stock, and a sale lot next door with thousands more books for $1, $3, and $5. It always changes. So, even if you're paying really close attention, you're going to blur over some of those books on one visit and see some of the ones that were there on your next visit with fresh eyes. So definitely a destination. I've been going to Brattle for must be 3 years now, and no matter where I've gone to the Brattle from, all the various places where I've lived in the area, always involves a short ride on Boston's subway, the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority, the MBTA, the T. And that happened this morning. and while I was on that short subway ride this morning, with my nose in a book, minding my own business, the same thing I've described on this channel before, and that has happened to me before I had a YouTube channel, happened again. It never ceases to amaze me. But it happened again. I was sitting there, I was reading. In this case, I was reading on my phone. Because one of the things that I wanted to get done, one of the things that was on my list for 2022, was to get my iPhone 6S taken care of. It just stopped making phone calls. It would do everything else, but it wouldn't make phone calls. So I actually had to buy a $15 Breaking Bad style burner phone just so that I would have something that would make phone calls. And I knew all along that was ridiculous, but every time I went to the Apple store, to the cell phone store, there was either an absurdly long line or no one was taking any precautions against a deadly pandemic. I told myself, in 2022, as soon as the year starts, see to that. You only need one phone. It's ridiculous for you to have two. See to it. Your iPhone 6S works just fine. Find some way to get a technician to look at it. And I did early on in the year, and Kenny, my guy at the AT&T store, made it work just perfectly. So I figured, since it works just perfectly, and since it's got 1,000 books on it, there's no reason for me to pack even an e-reader for such a short trip. I would just read on my phone. So I was reading a book on my phone. I was minding my own business when another passenger sat down no more than 10 feet away from me, took out her phone, and started to transact business. She started to do business with some sort of credit card company that she wanted to settle things, and she thought that her subway ride was the time to do that. And I heard her start, and I thought, it can't possibly be that this is going to happen again. No way. People just aren't that dumb. But sure enough, I heard her give her last name and her first name. She had to spell out the last name. She gave her address to the person on the other end of the phone. And then she was asked to recite her bank information, which is perfectly fine if she's in her living room. But she was on a subway. She was on a subway car, surrounded by people she doesn't know. And amazingly, I'm always stunned when this happened. Amazingly, she did. She did exactly that. She gave the name on the card, on her debit card. She gave the full number on the debit card. She gave the expiration date. She gave the little CDC number on the back, the code, the verification code. All of that said in a bored, obnoxious, rude, unmasked, of course, extra loud voice on the subway, where anyone listening and just thumbing through their phone could have, without any outward sign at all, simply switched over to the note function on their phone and copied down all of her financial information, anything that anyone would ever need to do an online purchase. She said all of that information out into the open air. That happened again. I still can't believe it. So that was my little subway story for you. Oh, and another subject before I forget, on totally different and totally unconnected subject matter. I remember mentioning that at the beginning, at the end of last year, that I wasn't going to make any tech purchases until 2022. Now it's 2022, and I'm naturally thinking, what is my next tech purchase going to be? I thought for a long time that it would be the new iPad mini. I've seen it reviewed in a million places. It's really, really small and really light, and apparently a real workhorse. You can get a lot of stuff done on it. But as far as I've been able to tell, it shares one defect with other iPad minis and also with a lot of iPads, which is that it doesn't really, whatever the device is inside the iPad that allows it to connect to Wi-Fi, that device is weak. If you get too far away, even minimally far away from the router, it won't pick up Wi-Fi. Whereas a stronger laptop, or a stronger tablet in that same distance will. And that kind of blunts the allure for me. I have an iPad mini, the second generation, that is fairly slow. And I like the form factor, but I'm not sure that the form factor alone is enough if this is going to be another Wi-Fi weak thing. I'm not really sure. I sort of debated back and forth on the iPad mini. But I have another idea for tech, for my first tech purchase of 2022. I have 2 now Samsung tablets. And in the past, I had a Samsung cell phone. And when I was recently took out and was reusing one of the Samsung tablets, the one I showed you the other day, and I realized how much I love these products. They're really, really good products. And it occurred to me, I don't have a Samsung laptop. I'm assuming that if I got a new Samsung laptop, I could install Google Chrome on it. I'm assuming there's no trade war going on there where it's not compatible with the Samsung. So I guess my question for you, before we get to the Brattle books, of course we are getting to the Brattle books, I'll ask this in my mail today as well. So if you're not watching this, you might get it there. My question for you is, does anyone listening to me have a Samsung laptop? And if so, how does it work? Is it as good as their tablets? Because I am thinking that I am in the mood relatively soon, in the next month, to buy a Samsung tablet, to give it a try if you give the go-ahead. And in this particular instance, and again, this has no connection whatsoever to anything else that I have said in this video, in this particular instance, for this next piece of tech, let's just say money is no object. I am willing to pay absolute top dollar for whatever you suggest. It can be the most expensive thing they make. I just want to hear about them. That's all. So anyway, that anyway was my morning. It was a bit of a morning. The tea is not always hospitable. It almost always has a bit of weirdness to it, unless you're lucky enough to have no company at all, and that seldom happens to me. But I went to the Brattle Bookshop. It was chilly and overcast because I think we're going to get a little bit of sleet tomorrow. But that was intermittent. Sun was coming out now and again, and the carts were partially obscured by a truck. There was a truck in the Brattle lot, so I didn't have access to all the carts. Still managed to find quite a few books. And I also did a little bit of shopping inside the shop because a couple of you have supplied me with store credit for the Brattle. Incredibly nice. Just incredibly nice of you. I cannot thank you enough. So the first one is the only mass market paperback that I got. Is it the only paperback? It is. It's the only paperback. And this is by Gary Grossman, and it's called Superman From Serial to Serial. The stupid pun notwithstanding, I had this book once upon a time, a long, long time ago. This was from 1977. I think that despite the fact that this is a cheap paperback, and I've never seen this in a hardcover, I think this is an indispensable volume to have if you want a library of Superman books. Books about Superman, the 1 or 2 even halfway effective novels, and the accounts, the various accounts of the character, and also in this case of the character's representation on the big and small screen. That's what's being alluded to in that subtitle here, because this takes you from not only, in my opinion, the greatest Superman of them all on the screen, George Reeves, but also Kirk Alyn, the first man to play Superman, and tells all of the inside, the backstage stories about how those things took off, what practical decisions were made about how to film, and all this sort of stuff at the time when, for Kirk Alyn and also even for George Reeves, at the time when, just like today, the people who were behind these things, the ones who were doing it for a passion project, really wanted to know how they could push the boundaries of the technology they had at their disposal to make it look like flying was happening. It's amazing to me that Superman started out not being able to fly. The character started out not being able to fly, but now flying is absolutely synonymous. Flying in the Cape. are synonymous with Superman. Which is, of course, why in current DC comics he doesn't have the cape and can't fly. But we're going to leave out the blue-haired lunatics that run superhero comics today. We instead concentrate on the 80 sane years before then. Those Passion Project people wanted to know how they could make this good. I mean, the tagline for the Salkind brothers Superman the motion picture, was "You will believe a man can fly." And that showed you where their emphasis was, that they cared about that particular aspect. And believe it or not, as dumb as the Kirk Allen serials and the George Reeves Superman TV show look today to our eyes, that was the idea. There's a kind of a full-length movie that was chopped up for The Adventures of Superman on TV, starring George Reeves, and it was called Superman and the Mole Men. And there's a scene in that movie where Superman, we see him flying over the streets, and the camera is located above him, and he's flying over the streets, and he's moving as he does it. And it will look totally hokey to you today, but if you ever see that moment was breathtaking when it first happened. And that and all the other behind-the-scenes stuff they fill this book. I had this forever and ever. I was very delicate with my book, but God knows where my copy went. But now I have another one. I'm very happy to find that. Then our next one, well, there are some things in here. There are some books in this pile that are very much typically Steve. In any typical Steve Brattle haul, there will be 100-year-old book about somebody that nobody's ever heard of who was from Boston. And this fills that bill double-fold, because this is Charles Francis Adams' biography of Richard Henry Dana. These are ex-library copies, Volume 1 and Volume 2, of the author of 2 Years Before the Mast, which I know it isn't taught in schools anymore, so and it therefore probably is not reprinted anymore, so you may never have encountered it. Once upon a time, it was an absolute staple of schools, the book 2 Years Before the Mast. Richard Henry Dana was the son of a famous literary father, and he had a very high-profile public life for the whole of his life. 2 Years Before the Mast did really well. It did really, really well as a book. It took off. And really made him famous as a writer when that was the last thing he was thinking he would be famous for. And Charles Francis Adams is, the Adams family. It still goes on, believe it or not. We still have the Adamses in Boston. And Charles Francis Adams was all things at all times, public figure, a Civil War figure, all that sort of stuff, but always lent his hand to literary works. And that makes this really something to have. I'm glad that I found it. There was no one else who would be glad that they found these things at the Brattle. No one would even care. No one would even know what they were looking at, I don't think. I think I'm the only one that snaps these up. And I have a whole shelf of them. A whole shelf of these 100-year-old... Well, actually, how old is this thing? 1890. So these 150-year-old 1, 2, and 3 volume biographies of famous luminaries from the distant past. I love them. Absolutely love them. Then this next one it's another brick in the wall, another continuation of what seems to be the way I'm going to approach this particular author. I've made mention on this channel many, many times that I don't tend to get along with Charles Dickens. He has a huge reputation, and I recognize it, and I know that how passionate his readers are, but I have almost never read a book of his that I enjoyed. I've gone back to them over and over again. I've tried everything, and I will continue to try, because Dickens, in the case of, like, for instance, Dickens or Proust or Flaubert, I know that I'm wrong. I know that I'm the one who's wrong. I am missing something in their cases. But over the course of that struggle, over the course of the decades of trying to like Charles Dickens, trying to do that, over the course of that time, I have repeatedly read about Charles Dickens. Over and over again. Many, many biographies, but also a whole shelf of the little fragmentary studies of Dickens in America, Boz in Boston, all that sort of stuff. Dickens as an editor, Dickens as a critic, Dickens as a novelist, Dickens, all that sort of stuff. I've read about the man far more than I've read the man, and always enjoyed it. He was such a fascinating figure, And I get the strong impression, it makes me feel extra guilty about not particularly liking his novels. I get the strong impression I would have liked the man. And this is just another one of those. I find them endlessly interesting. I read them with far more interest than I've ever read any of his actual books. This is by John Butt and Kathleen Tillotson, and it's called Dickens at Work. Just a little book about how Dickens wrote his novels, how he went about it, what he was doing from day to day in writing his books. I know that I'm going to enjoy this. I'm going to do my best to clean up that cover. It might not be possible. It looks to me like that stuff has soaked in to the paper of the cover, but I'm going to try my best to clean it up. But I swear, this goes on a shelf. I now have a shelf of books about some aspect of Charles Dickens without having a shelf of dog-eared and beloved hardcovers or paperbacks of Charles Dickens. I don't go back to the man's work. I go back to reading about him. This next book is also a stereotypical Steve purchase at the Brattle. And it also deals with, if we're talking about 120, 130, 140-year-old Boston luminaries like Charles Francis Adams or Richard Henry Dana Jr. or Richard Henry Dana Sr. If we're talking about that as a stereotypical Steve niche interest, Steve has another stereotypical niche interest. And that is what we could loosely call the progressive era in Washington, D.C. So Grover Cleveland, McKinley, Roosevelt, Taft, even the beginning of Wilson's administration. And not just those men, and not just their policies, what was going on in the nation, but also the social life of Washington, D.C. at the time, which then, as now, was ruled by society matrons. The social life was not ruled by men. It was ruled by women. And the society matrons, whether they were preeminent and wintry literary figures who were all by themselves, or whether they were famous widows, or whether they were famous wives. Wives of famous politicians, wives of lawmakers, wives of ambassadors. The Washington area society matron of what we could call the progressive era, about the turn of the 20th century, I find endlessly fascinating. How's that for a niche interest? Almost all of those matrons wrote books at one point or another. Almost all of them did. And they also feature prominently in the better biographies of all of their menfolk, and all of their menfolk wrote books as well. It was a very, very literate, conscious age. America was changing in those years. Keep in mind, this was before the Great Depression. It was before either World War. But it was after America had started to amass genuine power. It was after the gold rush. It was after a lot of things that were making Americans think differently about themselves. I want to stress that because that change in attitude, that bigger thinking, that we're walking more broadly on the avenue, that phrase, that sort of thing, that happened before any of the setbacks and tragedies of the 20th century that actually did put America on the front of the international stage. Those things happened first. That change in attitude happened first. That deep, deep, sudden gust of awareness that this is not an agrarian country anymore, that there's genuine money, power, and wealth accumulating in cities, and it's a broad open world in front of us for money, for industry, for art. It's a broad open world in front of us. That feeling filled the air in the era that I'm talking about. In addition to the progressive politics, in addition to anything else, that feeling filled the air, and it fills the writing of the time. Not that this is convincing anybody. It's still the ultimate niche. And I love it, and fortunately the Brattle is a type of store that can really feed that interest. Outside of, I don't think Washington, D.C. area has used bookstores anymore, but once upon a time they had quite a few, and you could find these kinds of books there. But otherwise, I would need something with the turnover, the indiscriminate turnover of the Brattle. And I found one of those books. I had completely forgotten that this particular woman wrote books, and now I remember that she did. This is My Study Window. Now, let me get you the front of the book. This is My Study Window by Marietta Minigorod Andrews. There we have silhouettes. Those are going to come into our story. This is from 1928. So 1928 was right before the party ended. And the minute I saw this at the Brattle, I realized, oh yeah, she wrote books. Because she didn't. This wasn't the only one. She wrote another one. What was it called? Poor Relations. Memoirs of a Poor Relation. Yes, and Mrs. Andrews was an artist of the God help us school of art. She had airs and pretensions, but almost no talent. She had an artist husband as well, and she was influential, extremely influential. Got herself on all sorts of boards, got herself on all sorts of directorships, and it was one of those awkward Orson Welles subplot kind of things where you have to kowtow to her, and all of the palaver about my fellow artists, even though you know how bad she is. It was just where the Empress has no clothes, but no one can comment on that. And this book is fantastic. I read this. It didn't look like this. I don't remember this checkerboard thing at all. I read this from an old library of mine. I never in a million years imagined I would own a copy, much less that I would own it for free, thanks to the generosity of people I've never met on an entire platform with an entire type of technology that didn't even exist the last time I saw this book. This is full of fantastic portraits of all of the people of her day, all of the famous authors, the famous poets, the famous actors and directors and doctors and philanthropists, and also the great. The great also traipsed in and out of her studios, her various studios, the Tafts and the Coolidges and the Roosevelts and whatnot, and all of their dependents and all of the lawmakers in their entourages. And all of them had to put up with the same thing because she had a thing. Mrs. Andrews had a thing. And it was the silhouette. She did silhouettes. And this book is absolutely full of them. Let me see. Yes. Okay. There's William Klein Borden. The silhouette of William Klein Borden. She had the whole apparatus. There's Senator Bora. She had the whole apparatus, blinding bright lights, and carving and cutting and etching material and all of that. Wherever she went, wherever there was like an event, and it was a fashionable thing. There's Marguerite Dupont Lee, who you would never know. Silhouettes can't tell you anything. When Marguerite Dupont Lee was just Marguerite Dupont, she was the most beautiful debutante in the city, and came from bottomless wells of money, like most of the people in this book did. And this book is full of those silhouettes of those people. They make you they're not even particularly good silhouettes, and they make you just yearn. You ache to your eye teeth that Mrs. Andrews' hobby wasn't photography. Imagine if her hobby had been photography. The products of her studio would be absolutely invaluable to us. Her name would be immortal, but instead she was doing silhouettes. And they were popular. I'm not saying that it was a dry affectation. They were popular. So a place would have a fundraiser for a library or a memorial fund or a statue raising or something like that, and they would make sure to get Mrs. Andrews and set her up. They would set her up with equipment, and there would be a long line. Places like that did sort of things. Washington dinners, societies, all that sort of thing. They had to have handlers for her. There was going to be a long line. There had to be someone working the line to keep people entertained. They knew that. It was a big deal, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. I probably, when my study window first came out, probably the selling point would have been all of the silhouettes, which a lot of them were in her private possession, or in the private possession of the people that she did them for, so the public wouldn't have seen them. Probably that was the selling point of this book. Now it doesn't have a selling point at all, except to me. But now the selling point, so to speak, for me, is her observations about her time, which are incredible. I will know everything about every person in this book. I will in many, many cases be the only person in the last century to have gone to where their private letters are collected and read through them. Get permission, talk with the librarians, that sort of thing. Because this book is, not to stress this too much, but this book is absolutely full of unwritten biographies. And that's a terrible shame. Because all of these people were infused with that new Renaissance-y feeling in the air, and it made them lead interesting lives. All of these people. When's the last time Senator Bora had a biography? It has to have been 50 years at least. And everybody else. I could pick a random silhouette. I just pick a random silhouette here. Yeah, okay. Madame Jusserand and her husband have never had work that I know of. And on and on and on. All the people in this book deserve biographies. And that era of Washington deserves a biography that I don't think it's ever had. That feeling that this is not just a sleepy, swampy country town that happens to host the government offices, but rather that this is the capital of a world power. That feeling happened at this time, and everybody could feel it, and it felt... Anyway, then we'll move on. These next two are also examples of the type of thing I usually get at the Brattle, and that is second chances. I always talk about how the Brattle gives you a second chance. If something comes through your hands and you really liked it, it's not a thing that's going to work on most people, because most people don't go through books as fast as I do. They get them and keep them. Whereas I as you've seen on this channel over the years, I get them and get rid of them. Or I'd be up to my ham hocks in them. So I get them and get rid of them. And you can never tell which of those books is going to, on the odd hop, just stick with you so that you can't forget it and you wish you hadn't got rid of it. And you never know when you're going to see it again unless you go online and just buy up your mistakes. I don't want to do that. So I wait for them to crop up with the Brattle again. They will. There are a number of book reviewers, for instance, in the greater area who have access to the Brattle, who routinely dump their review copies and finished copies there. I get a second chance at a lot of the things that stick with me. The first of these might be one of those, or maybe it's just a sign that I am slowly but surely becoming a dude bro. Because this is James Ron. This is Dying Every Day. Seneca in the Age of Nero. So this is all about one of the dude bro Holy Trinity. There's Epictetus, there's Seneca, and of course there's Marcus Aurelius, who they quote and read and reread so many times they pretty much call him Marcus or Marky. But I remember liking this. I wrote about it. If I remember, I'll leave a link to any review if I can remember to find it. It's all about Seneca. It's full of well-intentioned and well-informed supposition about what we can and cannot know about Seneca. And I confess, I thought about this because I just recently got a paperback version of that 50 Letters to a Stoic by Seneca, and was rereading it and reading that volume that we saw in the mail, and I was kind of liking it. Not for any of the stuff that it is quarried for on the Dude Bro channels, but rather for all of the personal details, the details of the time. I remember liking this. I'm certainly happy to give it another try. This next one, much more so. This next one I should never have got rid of. And if you're wondering, I checked, and this is not my copy. This is by Eric J. Dolan, and it is A Furious Sky. This is a history of hurricanes in the United States, in the Americas, and for the centuries before they were tracked and named, and then from the 1930s on, when we know them, we knew their characteristics, and they all made headlines. I loved this book when I first read it. I had no idea why I got rid of it. As soon as I saw it at the Brattle, I realized I don't have a copy. And it's of a particular interest to me because Eric J. Dolan has a new book coming out about privateers during the American Revolution, which A Furious Sky, a history of hurricanes in North America, is fascinating to me. A history of privateering in the American Revolution is, let's just say, a little more fascinating to me. So I already know I hated he did a book called Leviathan about whaling that I hated, absolutely hated. Even though at the time that I hated it, I still recognized it as fairly well done. I just think, it's 2022. I don't think it's legitimate anymore to write books about whaling that aren't indictments from beginning to end. I don't think that's excusable anymore. I don't want to excuse that anymore. I don't want to excuse a book that mentions, describes, or even implies that whaling might be a sport or an industry. I just don't want to do that. I don't have any patience or tolerance for authors who do. There was one just a couple of years ago called The Last Whalers, about a small group of people who hunt whales for fun. Not for a minute do you believe when you're reading the book, even if you're disposed to believe it, not for a minute do you believe they're hiding it out of necessity, and it's certainly not a cultural thing. It's certainly not a cultural thing. And all throughout the book, The Last Whalers, the author and the people who are doing the killing of the whales are perfectly aware of the fact that these aren't just dumb animals, that they have deep family connections, deep love, culture they pass on from generation to generation. They're killing them anyway. But The Furious Sky I really liked. I might not have liked Leviathan because I don't want to see those books anymore. It's utterly inexcusable for you to open your book with a natural history examination of how complex and intelligent and emotional and feeling and sentient and self-aware whales are, and then spend the rest of your book writing dispassionately about how there was an industry set up to murder them in front of their children, and then to murder the children, or to murder the children in front of the parents because they aren't going to leave each other. I didn't like that book, but I loved A Furious Sky. And I'll be happy to reread it. Sorry, that spittle generated out of nowhere. This next one is also a familiar kind of purchase that I make at the Brattle, thanks to this channel. It happened before YouTube, but YouTube has accelerated it a great deal, which is that I will show you something, I will talk about it a little, it will intrigue you, and I will get an email. I leave my email on every video. I'll be leaving it on this video. Feel free to email me about anything else. And I also want to stress a point that I made the other day, just in case it didn't reach everybody at the same time. I leave my personal email on every video that I make. It is easy to find. If you have a personal question for me, a recommendation that you want, a question about Frida or about reviewing or whatever, if you have a question for me, and you intentionally ignore that email and send me that question through my website has an email, stevedonoghue.com. Open Letters Review has an email, openlettersreview@gmail or something like that. If you go out of your way to ignore the email I'm giving you and send me a message some other way, I'm going to ignore that message. I am not going to write back to you and say, hey, could you use the address I provided you? I'm just going to ignore it. You are literally howling down a well if you do that. I just thought I'd mention it again, that's all, because I'm mentioning that I leave my email on every video, and because I leave my email on every video, it's easy to contact me if you see something that you want. And usually the ones I respond to in the positive are the people that are, unfortunately, as you probably know if you're listening to this, quite a few people, that, you know, they live in a town, they love their neighbors, but there isn't a good bookstore of any kind within 50 miles. And even within 50 miles, there isn't a really good used bookstore. So if I hold up 6, 7 books on this channel and talk about them all, and one of them really strikes your fancy, and you're in that kind of situation, your only option is to shop for it online. And I've told horror stories about shopping for books online, so is Sean D. Standfast. The horror stories are real. Plenty of people who are selling books online are simply lying about what they're selling you. They're counting on the fact that you won't go through the bother of returning it. They're counting on the fact that they can just take your money and run. So I don't blame you at all. If you're in that kind of a situation, you're, 70 miles outside of Kenosha and you don't have a bookstore. But you don't want to shop online either. I understand that completely. And I am perfectly happy to be your personal shopper at the used bookstores, the Brattle and the thrift shops and whatnot that I go to. Perfectly happy to do that. I don't consider that an imposition or a burden at all. You know me, first of all, so you know that I'm not going to take you to the cleaners. The worst that will happen here is that I might forget, or that it might take some time. But at least it's trustworthy, that I can find it for you and I can send it to you, and that happens all the time on this channel. And so I am constantly rebuying things, because I will haul something and I will think, okay, this is great, I know just where I'm going to put it. And then I'll get one of those emails and I respond by sending the book. And this is another one of those examples. This is a book I've shown you before. I just found it again. I found it with one of these Mylar library coverings. This is by Godfrey Hodgson, and it is The Gentleman from New York, a biography of Daniel Patrick Moynihan, with an ex-library copy. So I'm going to have to take the paper dust jacket out of this Mylar sheath. I'm going to slide it out of that sheath, because this sticker is not on the Mylar, it's on the book. Once I have the naked dust jacket without the Mylar, you put it on a flat surface and get this sticker off it, and then slide the cover back into the Mylar, and then presto, I have a covered book without the library sticker. This is deeply, deeply fascinating figure. And this is a great biography as well of him, a senator who managed to touch pitch and not be defiled, which is very, very rare. He managed to be part of the Nixon administration without becoming a pawn or a tool or a creature or a golem of Nixon, which didn't happen to most people. And even at the time, even back then in the Nixon administration, I was saying to anybody who would listen, and to plenty of people who didn't want to listen, I was saying, we're going to have to deal with everyone who has been infected by this monster. It's not enough that he has retired to, Yorba Linda and is writing books and articles for Redbook or whatnot. It's not enough that he is gone. He infected an entire generation of people, and we're going to have to deal with all of them until they are old and gray. And then for 20 years, it was Pat Buchanan. And I was saying that. I was repeating, I was right. See how pestilential and piggish this guy is? Well, he learned from the master. And we're still dealing with that with Roger Stone, who tried to overthrow the government of the country, something that didn't even occur to Nixon to do. We're still dealing with all of the mud-stained progeny of Richard Nixon. And somehow Moynihan managed to be part of all that and not become defiled by it, which is kind of a miracle on its own. This is an absolutely terrific biography, perfect companion. There's also a big volume of the collected letters of Daniel Patrick Moynihan. They go together just beautifully. And I had this. I talked about it, I think, probably in a library tour. And then one of you said, me wanty, and a big softy that I am, I sent it out. This next one is a UK hardcover, a naked hardcover book that I got on this channel. If you look back, I don't advise it, but if you go back in mail halls, you'll see it. I really liked it, but I got rid of it. And it turns out the UK naked hardcover is very nice. Same design, but much prettier. This is Demon Voices by Philip Pullman. This is stories, just pieces about writing. So if you invite him to give a lecture or a speech or something about where you find your ideas, how you write your stories, that sort of thing, this is just one big collection of those. Plus all the prefaces and introductions that he felt were worth reprinting, all in this naked hardcover. So, and I was looking at this on the subway ride back, and noticed that it is very lovingly and carefully and neatly annotated. The person who had this before me put a lot of thought into. They were thinking the whole time that they were reading it. I love that. Absolutely love that. And then the last thing that we'll do here, a typically huge Brattle mail haul here, is an edition. It's a pretty book. It's a pretty edition. For some reason, there were a bunch of those in the sale lot. They never show up in the sale lot. For some reason, there were a bunch of them that were. And it wasn't Folio Society. This is the number of people who do these things, right? I guess this is just a collector's edition. Is that what it's called? I don't really know who did this. It's cloth paper and sewn binding. One of you will know better than I do. The Easton Press. This is the Easton Press. I don't know. Do those of you who know these fancy books, are Easton Press's editions fairly durable? Will I be beating the hell out of this? I don't know. But I saw a bunch of those in the sale lot, and I was just staring at them. I was thinking, well, okay, but I don't want these things just for the sake of it. I mean, they were odd choices. There were odd choices out there, and none of them really appealed. Not really. I mean, 7 illustrious lives from the Dryden translation of Plutarch, with none of the comparative lives, no notes, no introductions, no nothing, that sort of thing. Or, an Easton Press edition of Tom Jones or Vanity Fair. I was looking at those things and I'm thinking, I know I like the editions that I have. It'd be one thing if I could find something here that I actually wanted. And then I did. I found a book that I didn't have it, and every time I've had it, I've given it away. And I love it. It's Washington Irving. It's the Alhambra. His book about the Alhambra Palace. Just an absolutely lovely thing. The cloth bookmark and the gilt pages there and everything. I've never had an Easton Press book, but I got this one. It's got all of these this original artwork all throughout it, and this is the story, Irving's story of the Alhambra Palace, where he actually lived. This book came out in 1832, uh, published simultaneously in England and America. So in Irving's attempt to take some sort of control over massive uh, pirating of books. And it was an overwhelming success. It was a huge success. He had a little period in his life where he started writing about vaguely Spanish or Spanish inflected subject matter. He was a famous author by this point. People started throwing open archives to him, and he started writing things along those lines, and they did really well. This book did really well, not as well as his life of Christopher Columbus. That was the making of a literary career. It made him wealthy beyond any dreams that he had ever had as a young man. But this did really well as well, and it came to my mind all throughout the 90s because I would always get customers at my bookstore saying, "I'm going to Spain. What do you recommend?" And I would, as far as a book goes, I'd have customers say, "I'm going to the Alhambra Palace, and you've got guidebooks here, but I'd really like something with a little more atmosphere." And I would always recommend this book, and it wasn't in print, so I would tell the customer, "Well, there is a book. It's by Washington Irving, the guy that wrote Rip Van Winkle. It's tremendously good. You'll really enjoy reading it, but we don't have a copy. I can't get you a copy. There is no copy in print. But if you come back in a week or two, I should have a copy." And I would just haunt the Brattle. I'd go around the corner of the Brattle bookshop and wait to find this in a paperback or an illustrated trade paperback, something like that. And I read it every one of those times and fell in love with it. I didn't have a copy, so now I do. Now I have a really ornate, beautiful hardcover copy of the Alhambra by Washington Irving, and we'll just see if this thing is durable. I'll give a chunk of it a reread tonight, and we'll see. But anyway, that was my my Brattle book haul today. So we have the Alhambra by Washington Irving in a fancy edition, one of the few fancy editions that I've allowed myself to get recently. Then Demon Voices by Philip Pullman. Any of you have read this? I know you've read his fiction, but I liked this book a lot, and I'm very happy to have it in a better edition than the one I had originally. Then Gentleman from New York, biography of Daniel Patrick Moynihan. Furious Sky by Eric J. Dolan, about hurricanes in America. Dying Every Day, about that dude bro icon Seneca. My studio window, about a lady artiste writing about the politicians and famous people of her day. Dickens at Work, the nuts and bolts of how the author wrote his books. A 2-volume biography of Richard Henry Dana by Charles Francis Adams. And finally, Superman, Serial to Serial, the smile-inducing find of the day about Superman in pop culture. So that was my Brattle trip, and keep in mind, I have a desire to spend a large amount of money on an impromptu tech purchase sometime in the next month. And I have my eye on a Samsung laptop. I'd like to buy a Samsung laptop. I have a feeling that the purchase will be painless. So I want to know what you recommend. So feel free, if you're in that position, I'd love to hear about it. Even if you just want to point me in the direction of YouTube review videos that I can do. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. This is quite long enough. But I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.